My claim that I'm responding to is the prescription of inappropriate drugs has a negative impact on our community. The opponent's secondary claims were doctors are often careless when prescribing medications which can result in the death or injury of patients. The misprescription of drugs leads to drug abuse. Third, people being able to obtain prescription pills inexpensively through pharmacies leads to illegal drug distribution. And fourth, the diversion of controlled prescription drugs directly affects crime. In response to his first secondary claim, his supporting was, mistakes can be as simple as pharmacists misreading a prescription or a doctor having illegible handwriting. This statement is an assumption that a doctor's writing can be illegible. However, U.S. hospitals have switched to computerized physician order systems, and there's been a 66% drop in prescription errors, as stated by Consumer Affairs. Another supporting is that pharmacists employed by drug companies recommend their employers' drugs to doctors. This claim, first of all, has no relevance to the doctor being careless when prescribing medication, because they are initially and knowingly recommending a certain brand of medication, and it's not a careless prescription. Although pharmacists recommend a certain employer's drug, the alternative is generic, and there is no relationship with plausible death or injury of patients with the brand drugs being sold by pharmacists, because it is basically for the pharmacist to receive more income by supporting a certain company's brand. The FDA requires generic drugs to have the same quality and performance as a brand name drug. In a recent study evaluated the results of 38 published clinical trials that compared cardiovascular generic drugs to their brand name counterparts. There is no evidence that brand names did better than the generic ones. Another supporting to his first claim was 1.5 million people are hospitalized and 100,000 people die each year from adverse reactions to drugs they should have been taking, according to the Journal of the American Pharmaceutical Association. In May 20th, 2010, in the New York Times, there was a case where a patient did not fill her prescription, neglecting her dosage recommendation by a doctor, resulting in a death from chronic bleeding. And this is a case known as medication non-adherence, which is when a patient ignores doctor's advice when it came to their prescription. His second secondary claim was the misprescription of drug leads to drug abuse, and his supporting was, drug seekers are prescribed drugs that they have no medical need for. First of all, we don't know where this information is coming from, and if we can even trust this statement. The given claim is also weak because prescription leading to drug abuse is dispensed or prescribed from non-medical personnel, and large quantities of prescription opioids to dealers and abusers, and are a source of supply for distribution in numerous states that have prescription drug monitoring programs. Another supporting is the White House study reports a 400% increase in prescription drug abuse from 1998 to 2008. Again, no proof towards this data or any information from where it comes from, so I don't know how we're supposed to accept this statistic. Another supporting is prescription drugs are the second most abused drug behind medical marijuana. This does not support the given claim that misprescribed drugs lead to drug abuse. There is no explanation of how or why generic drugs are the second most abused. From the data found prescription drug abuse website, generic drug abuse is linked with delinquent behavior and with experimenting with illegal drugs. There is no initial relationship between over-the-counter medicine and marijuana. Only the fact that people can use prescription drugs for something other than they are prescribed for, whether you do it one time or 100 times, is considered drug abuse, as stated by the National Institute of Health. The third secondary claim was people being able to obtain prescription pills inexpensively through pharmacies leads to illegal drug distribution, and his support was certain controlled prescription drugs can be resold for profit. This given support to claim is repetitive to the speaker's secondary, and that prescribed drugs can be resold for profit. So it doesn't really help support his claim. The fourth secondary claim was the diversion of controlled prescription drugs directly affects crime, and his supporting was in areas where CDPs are popular property and violent crimes increase. This was proven by a study done by the National Drug Intelligence Center near the Great Lakes area. There is again no evidence supporting this claim, and the statistics is only set to near the Great Lakes area, which doesn't give us much backing as to CPD's effect on crime. There is only sample evidence being given based on a selection population rather than a nation as a whole. Prescription drugs play a major role in the daily life of more than half of all the Americans, and these medications have a positive impact on their life. The prescription of inappropriate drugs does not have a negative impact on the disease.
All right, well, you thoroughly cover everything, and you're signposting things as you go along. What's missing sometimes is the inference that goes along with your analysis or the evidence that you present. In other words, you're not always telling me or the audience what conclusion we're supposed to draw from either the press on the evidence that was being made or the inference that we should be drawing from the data that you've presented on your own particular point. Especially, for instance, on that third point, you basically come down on the argument and says, well, it basically repeats the second point. All right, then, how do all the arguments you made on the second point apply to mitigating this particular point? Do they all simply repeat themselves, or is there a particular reason that they are unique and answer the advocate's point? I don't really know. It really feels sometimes like you are, instead of looking at what the argument says and the inferences that are being made, you're just going at this in a line-by-line progression instead of looking at the whole argument. And you have a lot of presses on some of the studies or the statistics that are being presented or some of the conclusions without offering substantial counter-evidence on those points. There are a couple of places where that's different. For instance, you've got some data on the need for generic medications to meet the same standards. Okay, so let's assume that's true. How does that answer the argument that the advocate presented? What impact does that have? You need to explain that. So even those places where you do have some evidence that responds to a particular point, you're not telling us what conclusion we should be drawing from that evidence and how that conclusion mitigates the claim that the advocate is presenting. That just needs to be a lot clearer. Instead, you kind of plow through and move to the next point and give some responses on that. The purpose of the responses is not just to respond to everything, but to mitigate the claim that's being made and show why the position you're taking is a more reasonable position. And I don't always get that. I frequently just get the impression that if there's an argument, I'm going to make a response to it, and it needs to have a broader sense of why you're doing that than you get there. But it was well structured. You did have a lot of issues that you brought up. You provided some data on some of them, but I think your analysis needs to go a little bit deeper than just the criticism of the studies. All right. Thank you.